The room was a kaleidoscope of laughter and old memories, polished to a gleam by the glow of the 40th high school reunion. Couples danced under the soft light of chandeliers, and the air buzzed with the scent of champagne and nostalgia. Sandra Williams, a striking woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, surveyed the crowd with an uneasy smile. Her husband, Mark, was somewhere in the throng, engrossed in conversation. She hadn't seen him this animated in years. Sandra's suspicion had started weeks ago when Mark suddenly became obsessed with this reunion. He bought a new suit, dyed his graying hair, and began working out, mumbling something about putting his best foot forward. When she casually asked who he was excited to see, his evasive answer set alarm bells ringing. Tonight, she intended to find out why. From her corner near the bar, Sandra noticed Mark standing by a tall, elegant woman with auburn hair. Her name tag read Jessica Taylor. Sandra vaguely remembered her as the cheerleader who'd ruled the halls back in the day. But it was the way Mark leaned in to speak to Jessica that caught her attention. Too close, too familiar. Her pulse quickened, and her hand tightened around her glass. As the evening wore on, Mark's conversations with Jessica grew longer. Sandra began piecing together whispers and sidelong glances. One former classmate, after a few too many drinks, let slip something about Mark and Jessica's legendary romance in their senior year. Sandra's stomach churned. Why hadn't Mark mentioned this before? She waited, her growing anger tempered by icy determination. When the MC invited everyone to the dining hall for the banquet, Sandra took her seat at Mark's table, next to Jessica and her husband. Jessica's laughter rang too loudly, and her hand brushed Mark's arm far too often. As the waitstaff served dessert, Sandra struck. Jessica, she began sweetly, raising her glass. You and Mark seem so comfortable together. Did you two date in high school? Jessica froze, caught off guard. Oh, she stammered, glancing at Mark. Well, yes, but that was ages ago. How lovely, Sandra said, her voice dripping with faux warmth. And you've clearly stayed in touch. Mark's been so excited about tonight, mentioning all his old friends, though he never mentioned you. The room quieted, forks pausing mid-air. Jessica's husband, a mild-looking man with thinning hair, frowned. You two stayed in touch? Sandra didn't give Jessica time to answer. She turned to Mark, her eyes blazing. What a wonderful reunion this must be for you, Mark. After all, you've been texting Jessica for months, haven't you? Funny how you forgot to mention that to me. Gasps rippled through the table. Mark's face flushed crimson. Sandra, not here, he hissed, but it was too late. Sandra pulled her phone from her clutch, scrolling to the saved screenshots of text messages she'd found. Messages that left little doubt about the rekindled affair. She tossed the phone onto the table. Jessica's husband grabbed it, his face darkening as he read. Jessica stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the polished floor. I think we should leave. Sandra raised her glass again, this time in mock celebration. To old flames and fresh betrayals. Cheers. The banquet hall was silent as Jessica and her husband stormed out, Mark following helplessly. Sandra stayed behind, basking in the shocked stares of their former classmates. For Sandra, the truth wasn't just exposed. It was served, chilled and bitter, like the best revenge. The silence in the banquet hall hung heavy for a moment, broken only by the awkward clinking of glasses as guests fumbled to reclaim their composure. Sandra sat back, her crimson lips curling into a calm, almost serene smile. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, but she wouldn't let it show. Not now. The table erupted into hushed murmurs. Everyone was dissecting what they'd just witnessed. Couples leaned toward each other, trading speculations. Old friends stole glances at Sandra, who had become, for the moment, the most talked-about woman in the room. The MC awkwardly tapped his microphone, attempting to revive the celebratory mood. Well, let's give a big hand to the class of '84 for such a fantastic turnout tonight. His forced cheer fell flat, the applause polite but weak. Sandra remained seated, sipping her wine with deliberate slowness. Across the room, she could see Mark pacing near the exit, his hand running through his hair. Jessica and her husband were gone, but the fallout wasn't. Mark finally turned and stormed back toward her, his jaw tight and his eyes blazing. "Sandra," he hissed, leaning over her. "What the hell was that?" She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "That? Oh, you mean the truth? Funny how that stings when it's out in public." "You've humiliated me," he snapped, his voice low but charged with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Sandra set her glass down with a soft clink. "Oh, Mark," she said, her voice cutting. "I've only done what you were too cowardly to admit. Don't make me the villain for airing what you already destroyed." Their eyes locked, the tension between them palpable. Sandra could feel the eyes of their classmates on them, but she didn't care. This wasn't about preserving an image. It was about reclaiming power. Mark stood frozen, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Then, with a frustrated growl, he turned on his heel and stalked away. She watched him go, noticing how his confident stride had faltered. For a man who'd spent weeks preparing for this night, he now looked utterly defeated. The murmurs around her grew louder. One of Sandra's old friends, Linda, scooted closer, her eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Sandra, I don't know whether to applaud you or worry about you. Are you okay?" Sandra glanced at Linda, her smile softening for the first time. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed the slightest quiver. "Better than I've been in years, actually." Linda reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're braver than I am. I'd have cried in the bathroom." Sandra laughed, a bitter sound that carried a hint of liberation. "Trust me, Linda, I've cried enough in private. Tonight wasn't about tears. It was about clarity." As the reunion wound down, Sandra collected her things, her head held high. She felt lighter, as though shedding the weight of years spent in denial. The final goodbyes were a blur, her classmates' words a mixture of sympathy and veiled curiosity. She knew some would judge her, but she didn't care. Let them talk. For once, she was the one in control of the story. Stepping into the cool night air, Sandra breathed deeply, letting the crisp breeze wash over her. Mark's car was parked a few spaces down, but she didn't head toward it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and called for a rideshare. When the car arrived, Sandra climbed in without a backward glance. As the driver pulled away, she stared out the window at the hotel, receding into the distance. The night wasn't a fairy tale ending, far from it, but it was hers, unfiltered and honest. That, she decided, was more than enough. The next morning, Sandra awoke to the familiar hum of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She had barely slept, her mind spinning with fragments of last night's confrontation. The sunlight filtering through the curtains felt almost accusatory, but she forced herself to sit up, brushing off the remnants of doubt clinging to her. A glance at her phone revealed a flood of messages. Old classmates had taken to social media overnight, turning her dramatic exposé into the reunion's hottest gossip. The messages ranged from sympathetic to sensational. Linda had sent a string of supportive texts, while others shared screenshots of posts speculating about the affair. Sandra tossed the phone onto the bed, her stomach twisting. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of freshly brewed coffee. She poured herself a cup, the warm mug grounding her. She was halfway through her first sip when the front door opened, and Mark stepped inside. His tie was askew, his eyes bloodshot from a night spent God knows where. "Good morning," Sandra said, her tone frosty but calm. Mark hesitated, his gaze flicking to hers. "We need to talk." She nodded toward the table. "By all means." He sat heavily, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Sandra, I'm sorry," he started, his voice cracking. "Last night was a disaster. I never meant for it to come to this." Sandra arched an eyebrow, her face an unreadable mask. "No, Mark, you didn't mean to get caught. There's a difference." He flinched, and for a moment, she thought she saw genuine remorse. "You're right," he admitted. "I screwed up. Jessica and I." His voice faltered, and he sighed deeply. "It didn't mean anything. It was stupid." She set her mug down with deliberate care. Mark, spare me the cliches. It clearly meant something to you, or you wouldn't have gone to such lengths to rekindle it. What I want to know is, what were you planning to do? Keep me in the dark forever? He looked at her, his eyes pleading. No. I don't know. I didn't think it through. That much is obvious, Sandra said, her voice razor-sharp. But I have thought it through. And I've decided I deserve better than this. His eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. Sandra, wait. You can't mean… I do, she interrupted, her tone firm. This marriage has been on life support for years, and last night was the final nail in the coffin. I won't spend another day pretending everything is fine when it's not. Mark's shoulders slumped, the weight of her words crushing whatever defense he might have had left. Sandra, please, don't do this. We can fix it. She stood, her movements precise and controlled. No, Mark. You broke it, and I'm done trying to fix something you don't respect. With that, she left him sitting at the table, the silence between them louder than any argument. Upstairs, she began packing a suitcase. It wasn't a rushed decision. This had been building for years, and now, with the truth laid bare, she felt a strange, liberating clarity. By the time she came downstairs, Mark was gone. She didn't care where he'd gone or what he was thinking. She loaded her suitcase into the trunk of her car and took one last look at the house they'd shared for 2 decades. It felt less like home and more like a museum of wasted potential. As she drove away, her phone buzzed with a call. Linda's name flashed on the screen. Sandra answered, her voice steadier than she expected. I saw the pictures online, Linda said cautiously. How are you holding up? Sandra smiled faintly, her eyes on the open road. I'm okay, Linda. Actually, for the first time in years, I think I'm more than okay. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape now. And that, Sandra decided, was a freedom worth everything she'd lost. Sandra's drive led her far beyond the confines of her suburban neighborhood, through winding roads bordered by tall trees and open fields. She had no set destination, only a vague sense that she needed space to breathe, to think, and to reclaim the parts of herself she'd buried over years of compromise and disappointment. By the afternoon, she found herself in a quiet lakeside town. The water sparkled under the late autumn sun, its surface serene and inviting. She pulled into the gravel lot of a small bed and breakfast, its cheerful sign promising a restful retreat. Rest was exactly what she needed. The proprietor, a kind-faced woman named Margaret, greeted her warmly and showed her to a cozy room overlooking the lake. Sandra dropped her suitcase by the bed and stood at the window, watching the gentle ripples on the water. It felt like a metaphor for her life, disturbed but slowly settling. Later, as she walked along the shoreline, the weight of the past few days began to lift. The rhythmic sound of waves soothed her, and she let her thoughts drift. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the moment. Pulling it out, she saw Linda's name again. This time, Sandra answered with a wry smile. Linda, are you checking up on me again? Guilty, Linda replied, but only because I care. Where are you? By a lake, Sandra said, her tone light. I needed to get away for a bit. Linda was silent for a moment before speaking. You know, I've always admired you, Sandra. Last night, what you did, it was brave. You stood up for yourself in a way a lot of us wish we could. Sandra laughed softly, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Brave? It didn't feel brave. It felt messy and humiliating. Sometimes bravery looks like that, Linda said gently. But you made a statement not just to Mark or Jessica but to yourself. That matters. Sandra let the words sink in. Maybe Linda was right. For so long, she'd defined herself by her role in her marriage, by the expectations of others. Last night, messy as it was, had been a declaration of independence. After the call ended, Sandra sat on a bench near the water, watching the sky shift to hues of gold and pink. A memory surfaced, one of her younger self, full of dreams and ambition. She hadn't thought about that girl in years, but here, in the quiet beauty of the lakeside, she felt her spirit stir. The next morning, Sandra woke with a sense of purpose. She pulled out a notebook from her suitcase, something she'd packed on a whim. Sitting by the window, she began to write. Not just about the events of the past few days, but about her hopes, her fears, and the possibilities ahead. Each word felt like a step toward healing. By the time the sun climbed high in the sky, Sandra had filled pages with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to voice in years. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare her. It exhilarated her. As she packed up to leave the bed and breakfast, Margaret stopped her at the desk. "You seem lighter today," she said with a knowing smile. "Whatever's weighing you down, I hope you found some peace." Sandra nodded, her smile genuine. "I think I'm starting to." Back in her car, she took a deep breath and started the engine. The road ahead stretched wide and open, a blank canvas waiting to be filled. Sandra didn't look back this time. She didn't need to. Her story was just beginning. A week had passed since Sandra had left home, and though the weight of her choices still lingered, she began to feel the first stirrings of true freedom. Each day brought a new discovery. Quiet hikes through hidden trails, conversations with strangers who didn't know her as Mark's wife, and moments of reflection that shaped the vision of the life she wanted to rebuild. It was during one such hike, winding through a forest that seemed to hum with life, that Sandra's phone buzzed again. She hesitated before pulling it from her pocket. The name on the screen made her heart sink. Mark. She almost ignored it. Almost. But something compelled her to answer. She stopped on the trail, her breath steady as she pressed the button. "Hello." "Sandra." Mark's voice was subdued, hesitant. "Hi. I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "I almost didn't," she replied, her tone neutral. The rustling of leaves around her filled the silence as he gathered his thoughts. I wanted to apologize again," Mark said. "I know I said it before, but I don't think I really grasped the damage I've done. I've spent the past week thinking about everything, about us, and I hate how I hurt you." Sandra leaned against a tree, her expression unreadable. "Why now, Mark? Why not months ago? Or years, when we were both clearly unhappy?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I was selfish. I didn't want to face how bad things had gotten. I thought if I ignored it, it would fix itself." She closed her eyes, the familiar sting of resentment rising. But there was something else, a faint trace of pity. Not for Mark the man, but for the brokenness in both of them that had led them here. "What are you hoping to accomplish with this call?" she asked, keeping her tone measured. "Because I've already made my decision. I'm not coming back, Mark." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to. I just needed you to hear me, to understand that I regret it all." For a moment, Sandra let his words hang in the air, considering their weight. "I hear you, Mark," she said finally. "But regret isn't enough. It won't undo what's been done." "I know," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "But for what it's worth, I want you to find happiness. Even if it's not with me." The sincerity in his words struck her, and for the first time, Sandra felt a flicker of closure. "Thank you," she said softly. "I hope you find the same." After the call ended, Sandra stood still, letting the wind carry away the echoes of their conversation. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward leaving the bitterness behind. By the time Sandra returned to the small cabin she'd rented, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire. She sat at the porch, watching the day fade into night. For the first time, she felt a sense of calm, as if the tangled threads of her life were beginning to unravel into something simpler. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Linda. "How's the new you?" Sandra chuckled and typed back, "A work in progress, but getting there." As the first stars appeared, Sandra felt a growing sense of hope. Her path was hers now, unshackled from betrayal and regret. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also limitless. And for Sandra, that was enough. 2 months after leaving her old life behind, Sandra found herself in a bustling coffee shop in a new city. She had chosen the place at random during her travels, drawn by its vibrant energy and the promise of reinvention. The coffee shop had become her unofficial office, a space where she worked on her writing, sketched out plans for the future, and began to rebuild her sense of self. That day, the place was unusually crowded. Sandra had just settled into her usual corner, sipping a latte while reviewing notes she'd scribbled in her journal. Her newfound habit of journaling had become a form of therapy, a way to untangle the emotions she'd carried for years. "Excuse me," a man's voice interrupted her thoughts. Sandra looked up to find a stranger standing nearby, holding a coffee cup and a hopeful smile. "Mind if I take this seat? It's the last free one." Sandra hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Sure." He set his cup down and slid into the chair across from her. "Thanks. It's packed today." "I'm James, by the way." "Sandra," she replied, offering a polite smile before returning to her journal. For a few minutes, they sat in companionable silence, the clinking of mugs and murmur of conversations filling the space between them. But then James spoke again. "Sorry to bother you," he said, gesturing toward her journal, "but you look like you're working on something important. Are you a writer?" Sandra blinked, caught off guard. "Not exactly. More like someone figuring things out." He nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. Sometimes putting it down on paper is the only way to make sense of it all." There was something disarming about his sincerity, and against her usual instincts, Sandra found herself responding. "That's exactly it. Writing helps me sort through everything." James chuckled. "I've been there. I moved here a few years ago after a rough patch. Took me ages to figure out what I wanted, but it helped to just keep moving forward." Sandra tilted her head, curiosity piqued. "What brought you here?" "A fresh start," he said simply. "I needed to leave some things behind and see what I could build on my own." The words resonated deeply with her. For a moment, she considered sharing her own story but decided against it. Instead, she offered a small nod of understanding. "It takes courage to start over." He smiled. "It does. But it also opens up possibilities you never thought were there." They lapsed into silence again, but this time it felt different, comfortable even. Sandra's heart felt lighter, as though the weight of her past had shifted slightly, allowing her to breathe more freely. As James eventually stood to leave, he hesitated. "It was nice talking to you, Sandra. Maybe I'll see you here again sometime." "Maybe," she replied, her smile genuine. After he left, Sandra returned to her journal, her pen moving with newfound clarity. She realized something important in that brief exchange. The past no longer defined her. It was a part of her story, yes, but not the entire narrative. Weeks later, Sandra had found her footing in her new city. She'd started taking freelance writing jobs and exploring creative outlets she'd once ignored. Each day brought new challenges and discoveries, but with them came a growing sense of strength. One evening, as she walked along the river that cut through the city, she paused to admire the skyline lit up against the darkening sky. The reflection of the lights on the water reminded her of the lake she had visited after leaving home, the place where her healing had begun. Sandra smiled to herself. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but she no longer feared the unknown. Life was messy and unpredictable, but it was also beautiful in its imperfection. She whispered softly to the night, "I'm ready," and she meant it. A year had passed since Sandra had walked away from the life that no longer served her. She stood on the balcony of her small but charming apartment, overlooking the lively streets of the city she now called home. A soft breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the park nearby, and the chatter of people below felt like a comforting symphony of belonging. For the first time in years, Sandra felt whole. Her mornings had become a ritual of purpose. Coffee brewed as she worked on her growing portfolio of articles, essays, and short stories. Writing, once a tool for survival, had blossomed into a career she never anticipated. Her recent essay on rediscovery and resilience had even been picked up by a well-regarded online publication. The editor had sent her an email just yesterday, inviting her to submit more work. Sandra couldn't help but marvel at how far she'd come. The knock on her door startled her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, there stood Linda, her oldest friend, holding a bottle of wine and wearing a mischievous grin. "I was in town for work and thought I'd surprise you," Linda said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Nice place, by the way." "Very you," Sandra laughed, closing the door. I don't know whether to be flattered or worried about what very me means. Linda plopped onto the couch, setting the wine on the coffee table. It means this place feels like you've found yourself again. So, tell me everything. How's life in the big city? Sandra joined her, pouring them both glasses of wine. It's good, she said, a warmth spreading through her as she spoke. Better than good, actually. I've got work I love, a community I'm starting to feel connected to. And, she hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. Linda leaned forward, eyes narrowing with suspicion. And, oh, don't stop there. Bill it. Sandra smiled, taking a sip of wine to compose herself. And I've been seeing someone. Linda gasped dramatically. Sandra Williams. You've been holding out on me. Who is he? Details now. Sandra laughed, shaking her head. It's not what you think. It's a casual for now. His name's James. We met at a coffee shop a while back. He's thoughtful, funny, and understands where I'm coming from. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people enjoying each other's company. Linda beamed. Sandra, that's amazing. You deserve someone like that. Sandra nodded, a soft smile lingering on her lips. I'm taking it slow. For the first time, I'm not looking for someone to complete me. I'm already whole. James is just a nice addition to the life I've built. Linda raised her glass. To being whole. And to you. They clinked glasses, the sound ringing with a note of triumph. As the evening wore on, they reminisced about old times and shared dreams for the future. Linda eventually fell asleep on the couch, and Sandra found herself back on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from James lit up the screen. Asterisk thinking of you. Hope you had a great day. Asterisk. Sandra smiled, her fingers moving to reply. Asterisk it was. And it just got better. Good night, James. Asterisk. As she set the phone down, she realized how much lighter her heart felt. This life, imperfect, evolving, and hers was everything she had fought for. And Sandra was finally ready to embrace all it had to offer. The stars above seemed to agree, winking down at her as she whispered to the night once more. I'm home. Months passed, and Sandra's new life continued to unfold in ways she never could have anticipated. Her career flourished, with her essays resonating with readers far beyond her small circle. Invitations to speak at workshops and share her story poured in, and Sandra discovered a new joy in helping others find their voices. One crisp autumn evening, Sandra found herself at a local bookstore where she was hosting her first public reading. The room was packed, filled with strangers eager to hear the words she had once written in solitude. Among them was Linda, glowing with pride, and James, standing quietly in the back with his signature supportive smile. Sandra's hands trembled as she stepped to the podium, but as she scanned the faces in the room, she felt a surge of courage. She began reading an excerpt from her newest essay, one that chronicled her journey, not just away from betrayal, but toward herself. For so long, she read, her voice steady, I believed my worth was tied to the roles I played. A wife, a friend, a placeholder in someone else's story. But the moment I chose to step out of those shadows, I discovered something I hadn't seen in years. A woman capable of writing her own narrative, of embracing her flaws and finding beauty in the chaos of reinvention. I found me. Applause erupted as she finished, and Sandra felt tears prick her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of triumph. After the event, a line of attendees formed, each eager to share how her words had touched them. When the crowd finally thinned, James approached, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. For the storyteller, he said, his voice warm. You've come so far, Sandra. She accepted the flowers, her cheeks flushing. Thank you. For everything. James hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I read somewhere that we write our lives in chapters. Some are painful, some are joyful, but each one is necessary to the story. I think you've just finished one of your best. Sandra smiled, the truth of his words settling deep within her. Maybe, but I have a feeling the next one's going to be even better. As they stepped out into the cool evening, Sandra looked up at the clear night sky. The stars seemed brighter than ever, as if mirroring the hope and possibility she now carried within her. Her journey hadn't been perfect, nor had it been easy, but it had been hers, and it had brought her here, to a place where the past no longer held her captive, where she was free to dream, to grow, and to love on her own terms. Sandra slipped her hand into James's as they walked, her heart light and her steps steady. This was her story, and she was ready to keep writing it, one beautiful, unpredictable chapter at a time.